has just been, not good.
I'm so upset. Oh my God.
Well, hello.
Welcome to TYT, all our lovely viewers, ladies and gents, everyone who supports us, views our show, supports what we do. We love you guys. We're going to start off with some good news today, all right? But before we get to the good news, let me give you a little bit of a preview of what else you can look forward to in the next 2 hours, 2.5 hours, if you happen to be a member of TYT, because we will be having a bonus episode. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my experience on Piers Morgan's show for our members today. So tyt.com/join to become a member. We're also going to talk about Trump further isolating the United States from some of its European allies, its NATO allies, and how these European countries are responding. We're also going to discuss a little about the Strait of Hormuz, whether or not Trump is seeking to escalate this war or de-escalate this war against Iran. I know that he's been saying contradictory things depending on which speech he's giving. And by the way, he is planning on giving an address to the American people later tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern. Obviously, that'll be after the show, which is kind of frustrating. But I'll do my best to cover anything relevant from that speech on tomorrow's show. Wosny Lambre will be joining us on tomorrow's show as well, which I'm really, really excited about. It's been a while since I've hosted with him. And Cenk Uygur will be back next week if you're wondering where he's been all week. But I actually wanted to start off with some really great news. And it's, I believe, a testament to an argument I've been making on the show that I think is pretty irrefutable. So what am I talking about? Well, let's get into it. We have fantastic news today. News that if she follows through with it, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez deserves credit for. Now, what am I talking about? Well, after engaging in a pretty heated exchange with me on X this week, it turns out that my issues and the issues that others have had with AOC's voting record on providing defensive military aid to Israel has led her to change her mind. Now, she still says that she's never voted to provide military weaponry to Israel. Whatever, we'll just let that go. She made a commitment that I think is incredibly important here, and it shows you that pressuring your elected lawmakers works, because this isn't Disneyland and we're not in the Mickey Mouse Club. These are people who signed up to represent the American people. They made promises, and those promises should be carried out. And the voices of the American people, especially those who put you in positions of power, should be listened to. And it appears that that's exactly what happened with AOC. So I'll go to this headline because apparently I wasn't the only one who was concerned about her previous support of sending defensive arms to Israel. So City and State New York reports at DSA Forum, AOC pledges not to vote for any military aid to Israel. And it shows that she previously said she supported sending defensive arms to Israel, which had led some DSA members to oppose endorsing her. So she's seeking the endorsement of New York's DSA chapter. And she was asked some pretty difficult questions, and I commend her on how she handled those questions. So the congressional representative, as they write in City and State, had previously opposed sending offensive weapons to Israel, but had defended the idea of sending defensive weapons, such as the Iron Dome missile defense system. And the point that I had made on the show recently was that I myself previously thought it was okay to provide defensive capabilities to Israel because I don't want to see civilians harmed. But it also is true that money is fungible. And when you provide the defensive military weaponry, well, that opens up more resources for offensive military weaponry. That's how money works. And then on top of that, you have to keep in mind, Israel had a military surplus in 2021. I'm sorry, an economic surplus in 2021, when we were drowning in nearly $29 trillion in debt. And that was the year 2021 when AOC changed her vote from no to defensive weapons for Israel to present after she got a little bit of pressure from Nancy Pelosi on the House floor. So I changed my mind on this issue. I think it's totally okay to say, you know what? I've changed my mind on this issue. Israel can defend itself. Okay, it's a nuclear power. So I give her credit for doing this. So again, to her credit, she listened to her critics. And according to City and State, which did have a partial recording of this virtual meeting for New York's DSA, she has changed her mind. So a member of DSA asked her, if the moment presents itself in Congress, will you commit to voting no for any spending on arms for Israel, including so-called defensive capabilities? And she responds, yes. Fantastic, great. Then there's a follow-up. Okay, and I want you to know that if and when you do vote no, a ton of us have your back. So thank you, added the DSA member whose name was not included in the recording. She responds, I appreciate that, thank you. So I think there's this big misconception that there are people like me who will never give you credit, right? I'm never satisfied, but that's just not true. I apply pressure because I want results. And if you get those results, great. Those results should be celebrated and the lawmaker should be commended for that. That's the way this works. But when you instead serve as a publicist for lawmakers and you treat politics as if it's nothing more than a team sport, it's left versus right, and you should always defend your side no matter what. Or more importantly, when you take the failings of your preferred lawmakers and you justify their failings by putting them up against other lawmakers who are far worse, you're just providing cover and making excuses for the failings of your preferred lawmaker. And guess what? You deserve what you tolerate. So unless you actually apply pressure, unless you build broad coalitions that apply pressure to these lawmakers, they really have no incentive to carry out your best interest. Because remember, they spend a lot of time on Capitol Hill with their colleagues, many of whom are incredibly corrupt, and they apply their own pressure. So if you're not gonna compete with that, you're not gonna get results. So there's more. I love this. So here's more from what she committed to. So the DSA member also asked her, asked her about whether or not she is willing to make some additional commitments that are really important. According to 3 DSA members who attended the forum, Ocasio-Cortez also said that she will oppose any attempts to enshrine the controversial International Holocaust Remembrance Association definition of anti-Semitism, which labels certain criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic, into law. So she is committed to voting against codifying such a violation of our First Amendment rights and a smear of justified criticism, honestly, of the Israeli government. And again, despite some who think this kind of pressure doesn't work, she'll never get credit for this, she got credit from me. As soon as this news broke, this is what I wrote. Great. This is good. Great, this is good. Let's take a look. Let's take a look at it again because I want people to see it. All right, perfect. Now, all that has to happen is you have to hold her to it. If she breaks those promises, there has to be accountability. It's that simple. It doesn't mean, I'm secretly working against, the left wing of the Congress. It doesn't mean that I secretly hate AOC and I want to see her fail. No, I want to see results. We, the people, deserve results. Promises made should be kept. It's that simple. And you should be wary of anyone in the media who tries to shut you down because you have the audacity to simply ask your lawmakers to fulfill the promises that they made as they were campaigning. It's that easy. Anyway, I love this. Hold people's feet to the fire. It's the only thing I care about at this point, because if you just see politics as a team sport, you are never gonna get what you need and what you want from your party. If you don't hold your own party accountable, and by the way, this goes for the right as well, including the individuals on the right who purported to be anti-war and are now licking Trump's boots as he dragged us into a disastrous war against Iran, which I don't really see an easy way out of. If you're not gonna hold them accountable, if you're not gonna hold the Republican Party accountable for doing exactly what they claimed they were not gonna do, well, then they're gonna keep playing you and you're gonna keep getting played. And honestly, I'm sick of seeing Americans get played. So let's move on to some other news. There's a lot more to get to. I want to talk a little bit about where we are with this war with Iran and some of the contradictory messaging, additional contradictory messaging that we're getting from Donald Trump. Let's get into it.
There was speculation on Tuesday night that Donald Trump was perhaps going to announce an end to the war. That is unlikely.
We're finishing the job, and I think within maybe 2 weeks, maybe a couple of days longer to do the job.
It's not the first time the president has set a 2-week deadline, many of which have come and gone without consequence. We have regime change, he told me, and this group is much more moderate and much more reasonable. The president told me his team has been talking with the Speaker of the Iranian parliament, who just a few days ago was taunting Trump on social media, posting, "Sad, but this is what happens when your leaders put others ahead of hardworking and ordinary Americans."
What he talked about was regime change, and he hasn't been able to deliver that.
Well, President Donald Trump greeted the American people this morning with yet another, in my opinion, delusional update on this devastating war against Iran. Let me read it to you. He says that Iran's new regime president, much less radicalized and far more intelligent than his predecessors, has just asked the United States of America for a ceasefire. We will consider when Hormuz Strait is open, free and clear. Until then, we are blasting Iran into oblivion, or as they say, back to the Stone Ages. Okay, Iran doesn't have a new regime president. In fact, Masoud Pezeshkian is still the president. And while Ali Khamenei has been killed, he was replaced by his son. So we basically replaced a Khamenei with another one. And so the idea that like there's a whole new regime it's just not true. So the real question here is, what is Trump doing? Is he being manipulative because he wants to declare victory and pull out of this war? Or is he just trying to manipulate oil markets? Look, that being said, Pezeshkian did release a letter addressed to the American people today that claimed that the path of this confrontation is more costly and futile than ever before. And I actually agree with him on that entirely. And then he talks about, who the aggressors historically have been in this conflict between the United States and Iran. He mentions the US coup of the democratically elected Mossadegh back in 1953, and the installation of the Shah, which was very unpopular with the Iranian people, especially with the secret police and all of the violations of human rights that the Shah engaged in. So he talks about all of that stuff. It appears that maybe we are inching a little bit closer to Iran, maybe being a little more open-minded to renegotiating with the United States. I don't want to give anyone a false impression because I'm about to show you video proving that we're still very much far away from succeeding in engaging in peace negotiations. That being said, though, the fact that Iran does not have a new president didn't stop our Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, from making a fool out of himself this morning. Take a look.
But if Iran is wise, they will cut a deal. President Trump doesn't bluff and he does not back down. You can ask Khomeini about that. The new Iranian regime should know that by now. This new regime, because regime change has occurred, should be wiser than the last.
Regime change has not occurred. Again, it bears repeating. The only thing, in fact, this war has accomplished so far is energy-related inflation because of oil and gas infrastructure being destroyed in the Middle East as we speak. And possibly a more hardline regime in Iran. In fact, if you look at some of the videos that have been released and some of the interviews that have been conducted, it appears that even some of the individuals who were protesting the regime in January have taken to the streets because they don't see this war as a regime change war anymore. They see this as something that really threatens the survival of their country. And when you start seeing historical sites in your country being bombed, well, it's gonna make you change your mind real quick about whether or not you really want any US involvement. In fact, there has been some polling out of Iran showing that now 2/3 of Iranians want the war to end. And I don't blame them. They're taking massive hits and innocent civilians are getting killed as a result. I mean, the opening salvo included the bombing of that elementary school in Manab, killing 175 people. So no one would want that. No one wants to live in that type of situation. Tehran is, dealing with heavy bombardment. And as for the so-called negotiations that Trump claims are taking place, the foreign minister of Iran, Arghachi, said that on Tuesday that his country had neither responded to a 15-point peace proposal from the United States nor made a counteroffer. He denied any formal negotiations were taking place despite President Donald Trump's claim that talks were going well. In fact, here's more from Iran's foreign minister. He had an interview recently with Al Jazeera, and this question was posed to him. Here's what he had to say.
Our conditions for ending the war are clear. We do not accept a ceasefire. We are seeking an end to the war, not only in Iran, but across the entire region. We seek guarantees that such aggressions will not be repeated, as well as the payment of compensation for the extent of the damages inflicted on us and on the people of Iran. At present, there is no ground for negotiation, and at present, there is no negotiation. Our position is clear. And at present, there is no ground for negotiation.
There are suggestions of concern or caution that another attack on Iran could occur during negotiations. Is this fear of a potential US attack? What is currently preventing you from engaging in negotiations?
Of course, the assault is currently ongoing, but your point is correct. We have no good experience of negotiating with the United States.
So can you guys understand why it's such a huge problem when, let's say, the United States enters some sort of agreement, a deal like the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA, which was agreed upon under the Obama administration, and how much of a problem it is when the next administration comes in and rips up that deal, they pull out. That leads to distrust. Can you understand how that distrust is exacerbated when you are pretending to engage in peace negotiations in good faith, when in reality you are planning to carry out strikes against the country you're negotiating with? And the United States did that not once, but twice. Once in the summer with the 12-day war, and the second time, of course, was during this current war that we got dragged into on behalf of a foreign country. When you lose trust, it is much more difficult to convince the other side to re-engage in diplomatic discussions to end a war. And it also signals to the rest of the globe that the United States can't be trusted. It's a huge problem, and it flies in the face of diplomacy. Now, with that in mind, Arghachi was asked, okay, well, what would it take? What would it take for you to be convinced to re-engage in peace negotiations? Let's take a look at how he answered.
You seek to enter negotiations with the United States.
Naturally, when the highest leadership of the Islamic Republic concludes that the interests of the Iranian nation will be preserved, the necessary instructions will be issued to institutions including the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Our goal is to secure the interests of the Iranian people and to preserve their rights. This is the goal of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And at present, this goal is being pursued through defense against a foreign enemy, specifically the United States and the Zionist regime. Whenever it becomes necessary for this defense to be carried out through another means, the necessary instructions will naturally be issued.
So if you listen carefully to what he's saying, he's reinforcing what we already kind of knew to begin with. The Iranians don't simply see this as a brief war that they'll fight with the United States or against the United States. They'll agree to a ceasefire and then revisit more war 6 months from now. They see this as a fight for Iran's survival. And so they're willing to fight to the death unless there are some real security guarantees, real concessions from the United States. And to be honest with you, I don't know if Trump will ever agree to the concessions necessary to really end this war. And so when it comes to the possibility of a ceasefire, something that Iran rejects, they do not want a ceasefire. They want an end to the war. A ceasefire means a temporary break, and then they're going to revisit more war later. They don't want that. And so Trump is either lying about the negotiations going well, or he's just working to continue, and I can't believe it keeps working, manipulate the oil markets. And it is still working. Our stock markets are just based on nothing. Okay, so gasoline in the United States crossed an average of $4 a gallon on Tuesday. And that's a threshold that hadn't been reached since August 2022. The S&P 500 surged nearly 3% on hopes that the war will come to an end soon. So Trump keeps saying things like, the negotiations are going well, we're gonna be done with this war pretty soon. Meanwhile, he could totally be lying about that just to signal that the war is gonna end so the market will rally. Now, every time that Trump does it, by the way, it works. I just, again, cannot believe it. Oil prices, though, also rose. The average cost of gas has jumped 35% since this war began on February 28th. And that's according to data from AAA Motor Club. And it's becoming a political burden for Trump, and he knows that. The other reason why Trump might be doing this in order to build a false narrative that we've won the war is so he could pull out, right? That's another argument that we've been hearing. But we just don't know. Now, John Bolton, who I have absolutely no love for, seems to think that Trump does want to pull out of this war. Take a look.
I think he wants to create the impression that it's about to end to help keep the markets optimistic. That can only last so long. I think what it shows is he wants out. He doesn't know what to do. He hasn't thought through his objectives. The administration officials say, well, regime change was never our goal. Well, if it wasn't, why does it matter that we're talking to a different regime? I mean, I think there's confusion and real concern about price of gasoline at the pump and the political consequences. That's what's driving Trump now, not America's strategic needs, but his political situation.
Okay, let's actually talk about America's strategic needs. Okay, Americans voted for Trump on the issue of cost of living, affordability, no longer getting dragged into forever wars, no longer getting dragged into regime change wars. Americans are struggling right now, and this war has actually made it a lot worse for not just Americans, for the globe. When you have these insanely high gas prices, energy prices, and even if you end the war today, it's gonna take a while to rebuild that infrastructure to get the prices back down. Yeah, it's gonna make a lot of people angry. I find it rich that John Bolton is telling the American people what their strategic needs are, as he is literally advocating for the antithesis of what the American people want. But nonetheless, we'll move forward because honestly, based on some of the other things that Trump is saying, stock market manipulation does seem to be the real motivation here. This is what I'm talking about.
Gas prices today, they hit $4.
We're $4, yeah, and we have a country that's not going to be throwing a nuclear weapon at us in 6 months.
But Americans are feeling the effects in the interim.
And they're also feeling a lot safer.
What is the plan to bring them back down?
All I have to do is leave Iran, and we'll be doing that very soon. And they'll become tumbling down. And stock prices were up today almost to a record.
Yeah, I think more Americans care about the price of gas. And to say that they don't care, which is what Trump was implying there, to say that they wanted this war more than a better economy, affordability is laughable to say the least. But he can continue deluding himself, telling himself, fancy little stories and fairy tales to feel better about the fact that he screwed up big time, big time. Now, another reason why I think that Trump is actually planning to continue the war and potentially escalate this war is due to a new report published by the Washington Post. So reporter John Hudson writes that the high-risk plan to seize Iran's uranium in a commando raid that would require building a runway in Iran and dropping in excavation equipment amid incoming fire came at Trump's request, signaling his interest in the complex operation. Further, he writes, or he quotes, "This would be one of, if not the largest, most complicated special operations in history," said Mick Mulroy, a former deputy assistant secretary of defense and retired CIA and Marine officer. "It's a major risk to the force." Military experts that I've been reading from and listening to say very similar things. This is not going to be an easy mission. And besides which, as we know, for the Israelis, this war was always about regime change. And they won't be satisfied until the regime is toppled, Iran becomes a failed state. So the idea that we're gonna risk the lives of our soldiers in order to get enriched uranium is insane to me. But on some occasions, Trump also just kind of brushes off the idea of going in and taking Iran's enriched uranium. So we don't know because again, he speaks out of both sides of his mouth. But here's one thing we do know, without a shadow of a doubt. The war against Iran is not going well for the United States at all. It's only created more problems because Khamenei was replaced by Khamenei. And the only thing that's occurred is that Iran is now using their leverage with the Strait of Hormuz as a choke point when it comes to the transport of oil. And so now we have a new problem of how do we get the Strait of Hormuz open? And you want to know who has realized that the war isn't going so well? One of the biggest cheerleaders of the war, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham tells Trump to wind down the war in Iran, seek peace. I would like to seek Senator Lindsey Graham's ass out of the Senate. That's what I would like to seek. I think that's what we should be fighting for. These disgusting, loathsome warmongers who never have to put their asses on the line as they cheerlead wars that get our soldiers killed, that get civilians killed, that waste American treasure, they have no place in Congress. Boot this guy out. In the meantime, let's take a brief break. When we come back, we've got a lot more to get to. We've got a lot more to get to, so stick around.
I think that this is
extremely political.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to our first social break of the day. Looking forward to reading your comments. Let's start out with Just Jim in our members section who says, Trump's reality or real reality shows by him giving a nationwide speech on April Fool's Day. You can't make this crap up. I mean, that is pretty funny. I'm super curious what he's gonna say. How irritating would it be if he gives like an hour and a half long speech on anything other than Iran? He decides to give us an economic update where he touts his economic gains. Can you imagine? I wouldn't put it past him. Nerd Ferguson says, does Trump want to escalate the Iranian war or de-escalate the war? The answer is yes. That's how clownish this whole situation has become. And people are losing their lives as a result of it. Jeremy, Dad Joke Dragon says, I'm glad AOC made the commitment. I wonder if she'll open the conversation with TYT again. Ro Khanna has gotten tremendous pushback and still comes to have the dialogue. That's why I really love and respect Ro Khanna. It takes a strong person to come onto a show knowing and expecting the host to ask you very difficult questions. And that has happened with Ro Khanna on multiple occasions. The rest of the comment is that dialogue needs to keep happening. It's the only way we're going to get through this mess. Thanks for pushing, Anna. Jeremy, thank you for trusting me and not being so cynical that you think that I have bad intentions by applying pressure to our politicians to serve us. I appreciate you. Let's get back to the show. I just want to thank everyone who's writing in to celebrate that AOC has made this commitment that she will no longer vote in favor of providing any military aid to Israel. I want to read 2 comments about it, starting with Octo Squiddies in our Twitch community who says, cool, I'm glad AOC is changing her position based on pressure from the left. Now we can make sure she sticks with it and hold her accountable. Yes, that's how this works. AOC still has a lot to make up for before I'll be singing her praises again. That's fair. That is totally fair. That is a healthy way of thinking about how you engage with politics or politicians. Let's go to Canadian in Hawaii. Hawaii sounds so good. I was just there last week. The timing literally proves that. Anna pointed it out. AOC got a ton of online pressure and the next day made the pledge. So yeah, Anna gets cookies. I'm not even looking for cookies. Again, for me, getting the results is everything. You have no idea like the endorphin rush that I had when I read that AOC had made the pledge, right? Like that's what I'm talking about, guys. So this is good news and I'm really happy about it. And you're right, you have to continue the accountability. You can't just say, all right, she made the pledge, that's all that matters. No, you want to make sure that she follows through. And that goes for all politicians. I don't want this to just be about AOC. I want to be clear about that. All right, let's get to our next story because I want to talk about the latest when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz and what Trump is saying about possibly reopening it. The Trump administration has already admitted defeat when it comes to lowering oil prices. I'm not kidding. Wait till you hear his quote. Okay, so this is according to a stunning new report in Politico, which states the following. President Donald Trump has heard from Treasury officials about the near-term outlook for energy prices, which the department now sees as likely to remain above $100 per barrel for some time. Now, just for context, if you're wondering, well, what was the dollar amount per barrel prior to the war? It was $73. So to go from $73 a barrel to $100 a barrel is a pretty big deal. And we're all feeling it right now at the gas pump. And by the way, other countries which aren't as fortunate as the United States are already rationing gas. I'm not kidding. This is having a global impact. It's not just about the US. It's not just about Israel. It's not just about Iran. It's not just about the Gulf countries. This is having a ripple effect across the globe. And if you're suffering already, and you are, we all are because of the higher gas prices, take into consideration the countries that are not involved in this conflict in any way, shape, or form and how they're now forced to ration gas. It's insane. But the report, believe it or not, gets worse. So apparently President Donald Trump is either incapable of or uninterested in making sure the price of oil goes back down. And the report states that White House senior staff and administration officials are discussing the possibility that oil prices climb to a record of $150 or more per barrel. According to the person familiar with internal discussions, the administration sees $100 per barrel as a baseline and isn't ruling out the possibility of prices rising as high as $200 per barrel. Disaster, okay, total disaster. So allegedly, the Trump administration is planning on invoking more emergency powers to try to reduce the price of oil. Time will tell what he will do, how that's gonna look. But while Trump is indicating that he wants to basically withdraw from the US, involvement in Iran, and I don't know if he's actually gonna do that. He claims that maybe the US is even gonna deal with the Strait of Hormuz. Why don't our European allies go get their own oil? Why don't they deal with it themselves? Fact of the matter is that there are Gulf countries that are absolutely pushing for boots on the ground. So while Oman and Qatar are lobbying for diplomacy, which is the route that I think Trump should take, even though it's a more difficult route, Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the U.A.E. are taking a completely different and very hawkish approach. So according to the reports, the U.A.E. in particular has been the most aggressive and even willing to join a military operation to take control of the Strait of Hormuz. And while the U.A.E. pushes the U.S. to basically occupy the Iranian islands in the Strait, they're also pushing other countries in Europe to get involved. Not just Europe, by the way. They want Europe and Asia to assist in this effort of taking over and occupying the islands in order to have control of the Strait of Hormuz or take control away from the Iranians. And so I just want you guys to understand how difficult and complicated something like that would be and how much it would jeopardize the lives of American soldiers. Because remember, the IDF will not put any boots on the ground. The US is fighting this alone when it comes to boots on the ground. And so let's start with the former CIA analyst. His name is Larry Johnson. This guy is like so tuned in to what's going on, and he does a really good job explaining why this type of mission would be incredibly difficult. Let's start with Karg Island. Take a look.
The likely targets would be Karg Island up in the northeast corner of the Persian Gulf, and the Keshem Island, which is right there at the bend of the Strait of Hormuz. This is bad. They're planning to do something, and they're involving the whole menu of the special operations community. And this is, when you're going to put your most skilled assets at this kind of risk, you better have a good plan. But the word circulating from those operators is nobody's done any damn planning on this. Seizing that island doesn't ensure that you're going to close off, open up the Strait of Hormuz. In fact, just the opposite.
Yeah.
If you seize Karg, the Iranians have already said, if you do that, we're going to mine the whole damn Gulf, not just the Strait, the whole damn Gulf. Not a single ship will be safe to move.
So that's not good. And Iran was threatening to use the Strait of Hormuz as a choke point when it comes to the transport of oil prior to this war beginning. They had threatened to go after US bases in Gulf countries before this war started. And they did that. So when they make these threats, I think it would be important for the Trump administration to take them seriously. So that was Karg Island. There's another island that apparently the Trump administration, the Pentagon, is thinking about taking over, and that's Keshem Island. How would that look? Let's hear Larry Johnson explain.
What's the military objective of taking Keshem Island, which is down right there at the turn in the Strait of Hormuz? There are at least, I forget how many, I think there's 150,000 Iranians on that island. So let's say you land 5,000 troops. So those troops are already outnumbered, and there's no way they can control those civilians. So they're gonna have a problem of possibly, U.S. soldiers massacring Iranian civilians. Yeah, that'll play well around the world. You got to step back and say, how does Iran shut the Gulf? They shut the Gulf with the threat that we're going to hit you with mines, we're going to hit you with drones, we're going to hit you with underwater drones, we're going to hit you with submarines and torpedoes, we're going to hit you with fast speedboats that can launch missiles, and we've got missiles shipped to shore and artillery and other missiles.
but that's it. I mean, other than all those,
other than that,
whatever it is, 100 categories of what?
So what's the military solution there? There isn't one. That there's no way that we could assemble the size of force that would be required to take complete control of that entire coastline.
He's right, because it's not just about invading these islands. It's also about maintaining your control of these islands. And it's become very clear to me that the Trump administration, the Pentagon, hasn't really made the appropriate preparations to do that in a way that wouldn't sacrifice a large number of our troops. So remember, the Strait of Hormuz being blocked off wasn't a problem prior to this war. So all we've gotten out of this war is more problems and 13 dead American soldiers. And at this point, thousands, we don't know the exact number at this point, but close to 2,000 dead Iranians. It's so dumb. And look, when it comes to the U.A.E, by the way, U.A.E, like, oh, you need to go occupy these islands and take control of the Strait of Hormuz. Like, I'm just so sick of foreign country. Like, shut up. I don't want to hear from any foreign leaders about what the United States needs to do. Okay? What our soldiers need to do. But I want to be clear. I mean, the UAE's dealings with Iran looked very different prior to this war. So Dubai, for instance, the commercial center of the UAE, has long financed the Iranian regime. Emirati diplomats were racing to mediate between the United States and Iran before the war. But ever since the war began, Iran has been hammering the UAE because they said that they would. They said, we are going to attack US bases and oil infrastructure if the US attacks us. And that is what happened. So after proceeding at a low level for weeks, Iran's missile and drone attacks on the Emirates have risen sharply in recent days, including nearly 50 ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones Tuesday. Iran has rained down more missiles and drones on the UAE, almost 2,500 thus far, than it has aimed at any other country, including Israel. Well, I mean, Iran knows what it's doing. They're fighting an asymmetric war. They know that the only leverage that they have in this case, when they're up against a superior military power, is to use whatever economic leverage they have. And that's what they're doing. It turns out the Iranians aren't morons, and they've thought this through far more than our own government has thought this through, sadly. Now, Iran has threatened to target the civilian infrastructure of any Gulf country that takes the side of the US and Israel, and they shouldn't do that. I think that's wrong. Targeting civilian infrastructure is disgusting. That is what the United States has been doing. That is what Israel historically has done and continues to do. And it should be condemned in every instance. So escalating this war is just a terrible idea. Per anonymous Arab officials who spoke to the Wall Street Journal, by the way, you should be aware of the source as well. Wall Street Journal, the editorial board at least, very raw when it comes to doing Israel's bidding and engaging in war. But nonetheless, anonymous Arab officials who spoke to the Wall Street Journal, so take that for what it's worth. What the UAE wants to avoid is a diplomatic resolution to the war that leaves Iran in control of the Strait of Hormuz. But as we've covered pretty extensively on this show, a military operation to secure the strait would be extremely risky. It would risk and jeopardize the lives of American service members. And as Democratic Representative Adam Smith stated, all Iran has to do is be able to keep the strait under threat, which means they need one drone, they need one mine, they need one small suicide boat. We shouldn't have done this. The Trump administration got played for fools, and they let this happen when Pete Hegseth is our Secretary of Defense /war. A guy who has no idea what he's doing because he was like a weekend anchor over at Fox. So I don't know. Please let me know how many of you are tired of winning. I'm real tired of winning. I'd like to stop winning, because if this is what winning looks like, I'd rather be losing, okay? All right, well, let's take a break. When we come back, we've got a lot more to get to. We'll talk a little bit about Alex Jones very vocally and overtly turning on Donald Trump. What's that about? You're gonna have to come back to find out. Ice cream. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the show. Oh my goodness. Okay, let's stop right now because the Kareem gifted 50 TYT memberships. That is amazing. Thank you so much for the support. You are incredible. And welcome to our new members. We also have With It Gal, who gifted 5 TYT memberships. Thank you so much. Jenna Janshin, who sent 20 TYT gift memberships. We also have D Mitchell, 2595, who gifted 5 TYT memberships. So welcome to all our new members. Thank you to the people who did the gifted memberships. You guys are incredible. Thank you for your support. It means the world to us. Let's go to Rose Orozco, who says, nice. Go, Anna, you did it. Thank you. I don't want to take full credit because obviously there were members of the New York DSA who applied pressure as well. And I commend them. This is how you actually get things done. I love it. We've got Passive Watcher 101 who says, I don't want to hear anyone call Anna a grifter now. She stands on her principles and gives credit where credit is due. Yes, exactly. I mean, I do my best to prove myself on this show, but it doesn't convince all my detractors. All right, let's go to some super chats here. We have Ian, no, I'm sorry. So Hamilton writes in, sorry, I don't want to mess up your handle. I'm going to have to read it when we get back from this break, but I promise I will. Stick around. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the show. I'm going to read some super chats because we've got a lot of them, and I want to make sure that your voices are heard. Hamilton writes in and says, I hope you cover this, Anna. Russia has completely shut the internet down and gone full North Korea. You said they were winning before, not so much now. I hadn't seen that story. I will look into it, and we'll consider it for tomorrow's show. Timmy D says Trump killed Soleimani. That was the top general for Iran. Ripped up the JCPOA and has attacked Iran twice during negotiations. Seems to me Trump has wanted nothing other than war. And I think it's fair for you to point all those things out. Absolutely. We've got Titan of Olympus 03 who says, how's it going, TYT fam? Just wanted to say you're awesome, Anna, and wanted to let everyone know, if you're not aware, the US is currently doing a countdown launch to the moon with crew on board. Let's hope for full success. Yes, fingers crossed for that. Earth is Home 1866 also writes in and says, let's stop Israel's support now. Trump is the weakest, delusional, narcissist, and most evil man on earth. He doesn't care a cent about any of us. Thank you, Anna. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious with what he's saying, like putting words in the American people's mouths about how they don't care about gas prices going up as much as they have. And then let's go to Choda Great, who says Trump took a $200 million bribe from AIPAC. He knows what he's doing. He's a corrupt rat. Well, his actions certainly seem to prove what you're saying. All right, well, let's move on to some other news because there are some of Trump's more avid supporters kind of turning on him. And it turns out that Alex Jones happens to be one of those people.
When your ankles swell up 3 times the size they were before, that means heart failure. And he does look sick. And he does babble and, sound like the brain's not doing too hot. And so we just cut bait on Trump and we just mobilize against the Democrats. This is not funny. This is not good. But he's gone. And that's it.
Okay, I mean, I agree with what Alex Jones said there. It's just that the messenger might not be the best person to provide the message. The whole thing about he looks sick, he keeps babbling, he doesn't seem like he's well. Okay, but anyway, it's very clear that Trump is losing support. And I think he's losing support for good reason. Now it turns out that some of the MAGA loyalists are finally jumping ship. And we'll get to more of that later. But first, I can't help myself. Here's a little bit more from Alex Jones.
Trump is in free fall, and that means we're in free fall in the midterms. Unless Republican candidates say, we are real America firsters, we like Trump in the past, we're sorry he's obviously had an aneurysm or something or a stroke, But we're not Trump. We're going to stop the Democrats and their plan for defunding the police and open borders and transgenderism and pedophilia and men and women's sports and giant tax increases and gun confiscations. And we just say, we're the original populist Tea Party Republicans that got Trump in. Just because he's been betraying us, we're not. That is the clear way out of this. We have to say, too bad Trump ran off the edge of a cliff. I don't think he's coming back from it. But triage him, isolate him, and explain, we're not him and we're not the Democrats 10 times worse. We're not the Democrats 10 times worse, and we're not him, and we're morally against this, and blowing up Iranian water supplies he's talking about, war crime any way you cut it. Put pressure on him not to do that. And just continue on the moral, proper way to behave, not stick our finger in the wind and see which way it's blowing.
All right, lessons from Alex Jones on the moral, proper way to behave. Got it. Okay. Well, he's not the only one who has turned on Trump. To give you an idea of just how historically unpopular Trump has become, I mean, what better source than the very enthusiastic Harry Enton? Take a look.
This has been a steady fall into the abyss. There is no bottom. Death Valley, Death Sea. That is how low we are going. And look at this. I think this really just kind of shows that it is not one event that is dragging Donald Trump down. It's a slew of events that have come together and have continuously dropped his net approval rating. You know, you go back to last year when he was sworn in for a second term. He was at plus 6 points. Then minus 3 points a year ago. Minus 7 points 9 months ago. Minus 10 points in October 2025. January 2026. Minus 13 points. And now all the way down to minus 18 points. If there's one big number from this, is that Donald Trump now has the worst net approval rating among independents of any president ever at this point in term 2. He is worse than Richard Nixon, who would be going adios amigos in a few months back in 1974.
You know, those numbers make a lot of sense. Because if you looked at that, for those listening to the audio version of the show, Harry Enton showed some of the other unpopular former presidents, right? You've got Nixon, and then you have George W. Bush at negative 37 approval rating, right? When you consider where he was at when he was first elected versus where he ended up. With Trump, it's negative 45. And that makes sense because even though George W. Bush was absolutely horrible, his administration was full to the brim with war criminals, they were still smart enough to not get dragged into a war with Iran. Okay, like with Trump, there's the corruption angle, right? There's the capture by Israeli interests. And then there's the incompetence on top of that. And the fact that he was high on his own supply after kidnapping the leader of Venezuela. So he was very easy to manipulate and convince that this is just gonna be a short military operation in Iran. You have nothing to worry about. Iran is so weak, they're historically weak. We have weakened them so much that this is your only opportunity to take them out. He did this without securing a plan when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. So yeah, he deserves those numbers. He probably deserves a lot worse, actually. So Trump's approval numbers have been suffering for some time now. However, pollsters, politicians, and pundits have argued that Trump has not really lost that much support from his core MAGA base. The question is, what's the methodology of these polls and who is considered part of his MAGA base? Because are they only considering his MAGA base people who currently identify as MAGA? Because a lot of people who voted for him and previously identified as MAGA don't identify as MAGA anymore because they've turned on him. But nonetheless, let's go to a YouGov and Economist poll. It was just released. And this is what it suggests. 3 weeks ago, 84% of people who voted for Trump in 2024 approved of his job handling and 12% disapproved, okay? This week, the numbers are a little different, okay? This week, Trump's job approval among 2024 Trump voters is 76% approve versus 19% disapprove. So there are people who previously supported him and they no longer do. And a lot of those people, they do reach out to me, which is amazing. And I commend them for doing that because they'll say things like, I was a three-time Trump voter and I'm done with him. Because he made these promises. And it was so brazen how he threw his own base under the bus. I mean, if you're still supporting him after he reneged on these major promises, not dragging us into wars, and dealing with the economic situation on the ground here in the United States, inflation, affordability, cost of living. He reneged on all of that. So yeah, people are gonna turn on him, but those who didn't turn on him, politics for them is something different. It's a team sport, it's about cult of personality, and it's unfortunate. Okay, it really is, because our country is in a lot of trouble. And the only way that we can change things is if we're willing to hold our own side accountable. If we're constantly making excuses for or providing cover for our own side when they screw us, when they do not follow through with their promises, they're gonna keep screwing us. Why wouldn't they? What incentive do they have to stay honest and accountable to the American people? Now, it is worth also emphasizing that those numbers have to do with the 2024 Trump voters, right? The poll numbers that I just shared with you. And that's different than other polls, which often ask the respondent whether they still identify as MAGA before asking them for their opinion. So it's a subtle difference, but it makes a big difference actually in the polling results. So if we go all the way back to the start of Trump's second term, let's take a look at this. So at that time, 93% of the 2024 Trump voters approved of the job he's doing as president. To explain why so many Trump voters are jumping off the bandwagon now, we should actually take a look at a Reuters Ipsos poll that came out just yesterday. So that poll indicates that 2/3 of Americans believe that the US should work to end its involvement in the Iran war quickly, even if that means not achieving the goals set out by the Trump administration. Among Trump's Republicans, 40% supported ending the conflict quickly, even if it did not achieve US goals, while 57% supported a longer involvement. So that's what's currently transpiring right now. Remember, we're still, this is like the 5th week of the war, so it's still pretty new. And as it goes on for a longer period of time, the president or the administration tends to lose more and more support, especially when the war is not going so well. We started off with this war being incredibly unpopular, and it's only going to continue getting more and more unpopular as it continues. So the real question now is, what is the administration going to do to end this? Are they going to end it, or are we going to see more escalation? So we're going to have to wait and see. Trump is going to give some sort of address later tonight. I'm not holding my breath that we're going to get much clarity from him. To Alex Jones's point, he seems a little bit unhinged and rambling all the time, speaking from two sides of his mouth. So we're gonna have to wait and see. But the situation isn't good for the administration. More importantly, this situation isn't good for the American people. That should be the priority. We're gonna take a break. When we come back for the second hour, so much more to get to. Really looking forward to sharing some of the other stories we have for you guys, including this ongoing and I think worsening relationship struggle that the United States is having with its NATO allies. Trump has made some more threats against our NATO allies. I'll tell you what those threats are and more when we come back.
I will eat your ass.
Indisputable is still the fastest growing news show in America compared to CNN, Fox News, and 30 other networks. We tell the truth on Indisputable because the truth is indisputable. We go places that other news media outlets refuse to go. When there were human rights abuses happening at the Victorville prison, guards and members of the community contacted us.
You, through your investigative reporting, unearthed very troubling allegations about specific forms of abuse and discrimination in the federal prison system.
It really doesn't take much to be a trusted voice. All it takes is to be fearless, report on matters, be an advocate. I called it the bullpen intentionally because it's a place of preparation. We present individuals who may have an opposing view, so we debate. Sometimes we interview individuals because their stories deserve to be heard. A survivor of significant police misconduct and his attorney We covered this story earlier, and to remind you of the horror of one man being shot at damn near 100 times by the police. We take time on this show to showcase the temper tantrums of Karens in the wild. We do this not because we want to see people's emotional outbursts in public, but because these incidents are emblematic of a bigger societal issue taking place across the nation, and it has to be checked.
My friend, my big homie, attorney at law, Benjamin Crump.
I just want to thank you, man. Educated, articulate brothers like yourself speak truth to power. It makes a great difference in changing the landscape in America. So
listen, no matter what you do, don't allow the politics of ideology to evaporate the soul that still exists inside of you. They don't stop, I don't stop. Racism won't stop, I won't stop. Systemic bias won't stop, I won't stop. People still need health care, so I won't stop. People still need criminal justice systems reformed, so I won't stop. You won't stop either.
I'm wearing one of our pieces of merchandise. So the funny thing about the Dragon Squad, and that's what our viewers call themselves. That's the name of the group, but every individual chooses their own name. You might have Cincinnati Dragon. You might have Harry Potter Dragon. We have a Grandma Sunshine Dragon is one of those that I remember. These are people that like to have an element of themselves, their lives, what's significant to them reflected as a part of the community. But the concept of the Dragon Squad is just something I threw away as a joke. I was mocking the Proud Boys, these like right-wing groups that come up with a name for themselves that they think is cool, but it's actually really lame. And I thought, off the top of my head, I can come up with something that's still kind of lame, but much cooler. And so I threw out Dragon Squad, and I just moved on with my life. But everybody liked it, and so they kept it going, and so we've embraced it. And I think again, this was during the period of the pandemic. I think it was sort of nice to have a renewed sense of community, a feeling that you're a part of something when everything seems so chaotic. And as a result of that, we've got independent artists online streaming, making beautiful digital art of dragons. We've got, we've released a number of pieces of merchandise that people love sending us photos of them. And then, by the way, for me personally, people send me, like you can probably see in the background, like a knitted dragon someone sent me. There's a dragon book they sent me, dragon board games they send me. People have done like custom ironworks, making dragon bottle openers. Like the fans are super invested in diamond art and things like that. And so it's great that they send this stuff. Sometime we're gonna have to set up a wall of all of it. But yeah, it's definitely brought the community a lot closer together. The fact that we were no longer in this big studio, I felt a lot more personally attached to people. It felt very immediate. And I know that I personally needed the connection.
I'd be worried about getting my ass blown out, right? That is a weird way of saying it.
This was my ass.
Welcome back to the show. You're watching TYT, and I'm your host, Anna Kasparian. Your comments, you guys, are amazing today. I just want to read a few of them, starting with Orphan Annie 10, who says, I don't give politicians credit because they change their mind when they see public opinion is changing, saying that I've always respected and agreed with Anna's views. So, Orphan Annie, I totally hear you, but I think this is really about carrots and sticks. You use the sticks to apply pressure, but you've got to provide positive reinforcement when they respond favorably to the pressure. Otherwise, why would they respond favorably to the pressure? If you're never going to be satisfied, they're never going to change their minds. They're going to keep going the route that they're going in. So it's just something to consider. I'm not going to be pressuring people to vote one way or the other. That is your right, and you have to do what's best for you. But you should always be skeptical of politicians. Politicians are not our friends. Politicians, are going to deal with all sorts of incentives that work against the American people, the very individuals who got them elected in the first place. So again, when political activism, when the pressure campaigns actually do work, you have to show them that they will be rewarded for it. Otherwise, they'll never do it. So just my take on that. Let's go to Joseph Stewart, who says, let's hope that the midterms and next presidential election will be a referendum on Israeli support and AIPAC recipients. Absolutely, I totally agree with you on that. I'll be All right, I want to read all of these comments right now, but I have to hold off and get to the news. I'll read more of your comments a little later in the show. For now, though, why don't we get to the wild, wild Western alliance that seems to be falling apart to some extent?
I'm so disappointed in NATO because this was a test for NATO. This was a test. You can help us. You don't have to, but if you don't have, if you don't do that, we're going to remember. Just remember this in a number of months from now. Remember my statements.
There's been a good deal of pressure on me to change my position in relation to joining the war, and I'm not going to change my position on the war. So whatever the pressure, whatever the noise, I'm the British Prime Minister, and I have to act in our national interests.
Oh, what is it like to live in a country where your government looks out for your national interests as opposed to the interests of a foreign country like the United States does with Israel? But nonetheless, despite pretending like the United States has effectively won and defeated Iran, the president is absolutely furious with our NATO allies for refusing to get involved in the war to help the United States. In fact, the UK, Spain, and Italy have, in different degrees, essentially refused to take part and even banned the United States from using military bases or even their airspace for military missions. And we're going to get to the minor details of that later. But first, I want to talk a little bit about, the important thing to know, which is that Trump is threatening to pull the United States out of NATO yet again. And the way that our allies are reacting to it further, I think, shows that this war could really degrade US standing in the international scene, okay? It could further isolate our country from longstanding allies. Now, look, I've got some issues with NATO. We don't need to get into that right now, but for the purposes of this discussion, going after NATO because our NATO allies refuse to engage in this war is insane and ridiculous. So Trump was asked by The Telegraph, which is a UK publication, if he would reconsider US involvement in NATO as a result of all of this. And here's what he said. Oh, yes, I would say it's beyond reconsideration. I was never swayed by NATO. I always knew they were a paper tiger. We kind of look like a paper tiger right now, Trump, on the international scene. But anyway, I'll continue. And Putin knows that too. By the way, beyond not being there, it was actually hard to believe. And I didn't do a big sale. I just said, hey, I didn't insist too much. I just think it should be automatic, meaning these NATO countries should automatically feel obligated to engage in this war. But here's the problem. Why would it be automatic? Because Iran never attacked a NATO ally. The whole point of the NATO agreement is that if one of the countries within NATO gets attacked, the other NATO countries go to war against the attacker. Okay, Iran never attacked a NATO country. And the Trump administration never consulted with or advised our NATO allies that he was planning to launch a war against Iran. So what are we even talking about here? And again, just to be clear, when it comes to NATO, NATO's Article 5 does commit it to collective defense. An attack against one member is deemed to be an attack against all, but invoking this principle requires a consensus. And the 1949 treaty only referred to crises in Europe and North America. Article 5 has only been triggered once in the wake of the September 11th attacks on the United States in 2001. But regardless, Trump did double down on his threats against NATO in yet another interview. This one was with Reuters. Here's what he told them. They, meaning NATO, haven't been friends when we needed them. We've never asked them for much. It's a one-way street. Okay, look, Trump was right when it came to NATO not fulfilling its obligations when it comes to their own investments in their own militaries. Okay, he was right about that. He's wrong about this though. Because when we needed NATO allies to help us in 2001, they did help us. In this case, this war has nothing to do with the NATO agreement at all, not even a little bit. He also demanded that our allies build up delayed courage, go to the Strait of Hormuz, and just take it. You know what'll happen if they do that? The same thing that just recently happened. I think it was a Qatari oil tanker that got attacked by Iran. Like, they're not going to do this. Besides which, there's a big problem right now with insuring those tankers because the insurance companies are like, no, it's too much of a risk. We're not going to insure this. So sorry. Just a total disaster. So in NATO, Trump has specifically targeted his anger at the UK, Spain, and Italy. So Spain announced on Monday that they would not authorize, by the way, Spain is totally killing it, like in a good way. They announced that they would not authorize the United States to use its airspace for US planes conducting military missions related to the war against Iran. And yesterday, Italy actually followed suit and denied US bombers from landing in their bases. And so let's go back to the UK real quick, because regarding the UK, they initially did reject Trump's request to allow access to military bases in the region or in their country. However, their government did change course and has allowed the US to use bases for very limited defense action. But that's as far as it goes, according to UK's Prime Minister. Take a look.
It's very important that we're clear. There's been a good deal of pressure on me to change my position in relation to joining the war, and I'm not going to change my position on the war. So whatever the pressure, whatever the noise, I'm the British Prime Minister and I have to act in our national interests. I should say that on defence and security and intelligence, we're obviously working closely with the US, as we always do. And in relation to the planning on the Strait of Hormuz, of course, that involves talking to the Americans as well. So, as I say, whatever the pressure, whatever the noise, my job is, as British Prime Minister, to concentrate on what's in the British national interest. That's what's guided me through this conflict so far. It will continue to guide me as we go forward.
And similar to the UK, Portugal is limiting their involvement pretty significantly. So Portugal has adopted a cautious stance on US use of the air base that they have, granting access under existing bilateral and NATO arrangements while emphasizing it's not a party to the conflict. Lisbon has restricted the authorization to logistical support, including refueling and transit, rather than offensive operations, framing the move as consistent with domestic law and international obligations. See, like, other countries realize how dumb it is to get involved in a war against Iran. Like, I really wish this didn't happen to begin with, because we do have a real problem, a very real problem when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. So several European leaders, including France, Britain, and the Netherlands, say that their navies would help reopen the waterway and escort tankers if the fighting abates, but not while missiles are flying. The Europeans have settled on a joint refrain. This is not our war, and they're right about that. It isn't their war. If you were expecting our European allies to get involved, you might have wanted to, consult with them prior to launching this war in the first place. But let's get back to Spain and Italy, because they have been very critical of President Donald Trump during this war. So Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez went as far as accusing Trump of starting an illegal war, which I believe is an illegal war. But Italian Prime Minister Meloni specifically hasn't been holding back against Trump and or Israel, by the way. And this has been going on for months now. So let's take a look at what she had to say.
Le minacce diventano sempre più spaventose e si moltiplicano gli interventi unilaterali condotti fuori dal perimetro del diritto internazionale, che dobbiamo collocare anche l'intervento americano e israeliano contro il regime iraniano. Un intervento a cui, lo dico subito a scanso di ogni equivoco, l'Italia non prende parte e non intende prendere parte.
So for our audio listeners, our podcast listeners, I'll read you her quote. She said, quote, "Threats are becoming increasingly frightening, and unilateral interventions outside the perimeter, outside the perimeter of international law are multiplying, including the American and Israeli intervention against the Iranian regime. Any intervention in which let me say right away to avoid any misunderstanding, Italy is not taking part in and does not intend to take part in. And look, we already know she's not a fan of Israel. She even accused them of crossing a red line in Palestine and massacring civilians. And I agree with her on this. Take a look.
E Israele ha superato quel limite con una guerra su larga scala che sta coinvolgendo oltre misura la popolazione civile palestinese, ed è su questo limite che lo Stato ebraico ha finito per infrangere le norme umanitarie, causando una strage tra i civili. Una scelta che l'Italia ha più volte definito inaccettabile, che porterà al nostro voto favorevole su alcune delle sanzioni proposte dalla Commissione europea verso Israele. L'Italia c'è e ci sarà per chiunque sia disposto a lavorare a un piano serio per il rilascio degli ostaggi, un cessate il fuoco permanente, l'esclusione di Hamas da ogni dinamica di governo in Palestina, il graduale ritiro di Israele da Gaza, l'impegno della comunità internazionale nella gestione della fase successiva al cessate il fuoco fino alla realizzazione della prospettiva dei due Stati.
So again, for our audio listeners, she basically called out the mass slaughter of civilians in Gaza, says that Italy is willing to work to secure a return of the hostages. This was obviously before the hostages were returned, willing to engage in, whatever it takes for a ceasefire, but, calling out the humanitarian violations and the war crimes of Israel is something that she was willing to do. And that definitely goes way further than any politician in the US is willing, well, most politicians in the US are willing to do. Certainly our president would never, he wouldn't dare call out the Israeli government and military for carrying out the mass slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza, the West Bank, the mass slaughter of Lebanese residents in southern Lebanon. I mean, it's just the list goes on and on. But getting back to Meloni, the shift away from the United States is a huge turn for Meloni because back in January, because back in January, this was her sarcastic response to journalists asking about distancing from the US.
Sbagliata questa strategia? Allora mi si deve formalizzare l'alternativa, mi si deve dire quindi che cosa si intende fare, cioè dobbiamo prendere distanze nel senso che dobbiamo uscire dalla NATO? Dobbiamo chiudere le basi americane? Dobbiamo rompere i rapporti commerciali? Dobbiamo assaltare i McDonald's? Non lo so. Che dobbiamo fare? Altrimenti, chiaramente.
So I wouldn't even say she's being sarcastic there. Basically, what she's communicating is, well, Trump keeps talking about how he wants to pull out of NATO. So if NATO is dissolved, what do we do for our own security for these European countries? And so the reason why I wanted to show you that video, which was from January, by the way, was because when Trump talks about punishing our allies or alienating the United States from our allies, where our allies start considering other alliances. And I don't know how that's going to work in our favor in the long run, but here we are. And we've seen what Trump said. So we've seen what our allies had to say in response. But is there any actual substance behind Trump's threat to leave NATO? I don't know. I honestly don't know. He's such a wild card and seems very impulsive. But despite Trump's claims that he can withdraw from the United States or withdraw the United States from the alliance, a law passed by Congress in 2023 states the move would require the advice and consent of the Senate or an act of Congress. Then Senator Marco Rubio, now the US Secretary of State, was actually a co-sponsor of that law along with Democratic Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia, which is an interesting, piece of trivia considering where Marco Rubio is today. But I do want to just say one final thing here. Because while Trump is considering abandoning our international allies or European allies, make no mistake about it, he has certainly abandoned the American people. Just today, he gave a speech, and during that speech, he said the following, and I quote, "We can't take care of daycare. We're a big country. We're fighting wars. It's not possible for us to take care of daycare, Medicaid, Medicare, all these things." And remember earlier this week, I shared a story with you about what House Republicans, or I should say congressional Republicans, are thinking about cutting from the American people in order to provide $200 billion to the Pentagon for this war against Iran. And healthcare, is at the top of the list. I'm tired of winning. All right, we got to take another break. I'll read some of your comments during our social break. So write in, let me know what you think. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about a fascinating conversation that took place on Tucker Carlson's show with Dave Smith. They talked about the Epstein files. They talked about this war against Iran. Lots to get to. Don't miss it. We'll be right back.
Innocent Americans are dying.
I love cows.
Lord of the hamstrings glory. All right, you don't skip leg day. I see you. Writes in and says, most moral, meaning the Israeli military, but making murder legal, aka death penalty, chosen but looting artifacts, sending thoughts and prayers to the mosques and churches that they all flattened while the settlers play evil Tomb Raider. The public relations is 0 out of 10. Totally agree. In fact, in the next story that we talk about, I really appreciated that Dave Smith talked about why there has been an uptick of anti-Semitism. I think it's important to understand why. And simply claiming that people have hatred in their hearts for Jewish people out of nowhere, no, that's not what's happening here. So it's important to talk about what's going on, why it's happening. And actions have consequences, clearly. So Rage Rock for Now says Americans feeling safer than what? Or safer from what? Like, were you guys awake at night worried about Iran's ballistic missiles that can't reach the United States? Were you worried about the nuclear weapons that Iran does not have? Safer from what? Don't put words in my mouth, right? Like the administration putting words in our mouths and saying oh, Americans actually love the higher gas prices because they feel safer. Get lost, please.
Have you been there?
How low can you go?
All right, I'm loving the music today. I'm gonna read a few comments from our super chat section, starting with Lord of the Hamstrings Glory, who says Israel's capital punishment move for West Bank captives contradicts their moral claims. With kids imprisoned and artifacts taken, Iran could apply that same logic to their 8,000 to 15,000 Jewish and expatriates, just saying it. Actually, there is a Jewish community in Iran. I don't think most people know this. There's a pretty significant Armenian Christian community in Iran, in Isfahan, actually. And they are considered a protected minority and are free and able to worship in Christian churches freely. You wouldn't think that that's the case, but that is the case. Now, Lord of Hamstrings Glory writes in again and says, is the world glitching? Israel's passing death laws for captives while Russia, yes, that Russia might join Iran to play political defender. Imagine Putin trying to claim the moral high ground while the West's public relations burns. The irony is getting painful. NATO is ghosting this manufactured war while Kim Jong-un is just vibing. By the way, so is China. I mean, China is very happy to see the United States bleed out, and we are bleeding out. I'm sure China's not happy about the fact that, oil prices have shot up as a result of this stupid war, but nonetheless, the rest of the comment is, we call him the big bad dictator, but he hasn't touched his neighbors while democracies are busy redrawing maps. The script has broken. So that was about Putin. Look, I don't want to let Putin off for the, war crimes he has committed. I mean, he did invade a sovereign country. You don't want to just downplay that. But you also have to be consistent. If you have a problem with what Russia's been doing, Well, Israel has done far worse in multiple countries. So you can't, I mean, if you've noticed, we don't hear a lot of our politicians taking jabs at Putin these days. I wonder why. All right, let me read one more. The Uma Karam, I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name. Thank you for your submissions to the show and everything. I saw you on Pierce, you tore them up. Anna, keep that fire burning. I'm an Armenian Lebanese, came here during the genocide as Lebanon, only Christian country in the hood. Keep spreading the truth. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for writing in. I will be talking about my appearance on Piers Morgan's show for our members today. So tyt.com/join to become a member. There were some spicy moments to say the least. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get to some more news. There was a conversation today that I wanted to talk a little bit about, and it was with Dave Smith on Tucker Carlson's podcast. Let's get into it.
All the people like Mark Levin, and all these guys, when they talk to their audience, whatever audience they got left, and they always love to talk about how Iran chants death to America. But none of them ever even try to say, to even approach the question of why. Why do they chant death to America? Why do they hate us so much? And this was
they hate us for our freedom. I just think it's more than Americans don't know. I think they've been prevented from knowing.
Yeah, that's right.
That actions have reaction.
If you spent your whole career arguing how violent and irrational the Muslims are, what does killing an Ayatollah mean?
Comedian and political commentator Dave Smith joined Tucker Carlson on Carlson's podcast for a wide-ranging discussion that touched on the war against Iran and a lot more. And look, if you are wondering why Iran would chant something like death to America, luckily we've got a history buff like Dave Smith to explain it rather clearly. Take a look.
Why do they chant death to America? Why do they hate us so much? And this was
they
always,
hate us for our freedoms.
If you ask Iranians, and not the ones who are, paid by Mossad to promote wars, but like they'll tell you very quickly why they hate us. And the whole beef, right, goes back to 1953. We overthrew their government. We installed a dictator who they did not like very much, who was not very kind to his political opponents, to put it mildly. And then the other big thing that they point out all the time is in 1980, Saddam Hussein invaded Iraq. Now, a lot of people from my generation remember this because this is actually what the neocons they would often like vaguely cite this when they were trying to push the war against Iraq. They're like, he used chemical weapons against civilians. You're like, yeah. What they leave out is that they were backing him when he did that. They facilitated the sale of those chemical weapons to him. And they backed and gave the green light for Saddam Hussein to invade the country. And so, Iranians remember that. Like they remember that. There was, I think, 500 or 600,000 Iranians died in that war. Like they remember this very well. By the way, another lesson from that war is they never surrendered.
Everything that Dave said there is factually correct. Absolutely, can be confirmed if you want to fact check what he just said. In fact, the current president of Iran just put out a letter to Americans, an open letter to Americans, and I'm going to read an excerpt from it where he literally repeats what Dave Smith just said. So we'll get to that in just a minute. But I also want you guys to contend with how the world views the United States, given every other conflict that's happening, every other thing that we've been involved in, whether it's causing famine in Yemen in order to defeat the Houthis, which we failed at, by the way. When it comes to arming Israel to try to wipe out the Palestinian people in Gaza, whether it comes to arming Israel as they ethnically cleanse southern Lebanon, displacing 1.2 million Lebanese individuals from their homes, and then announcing that they're going to demolish every home in southern Lebanon and just take the land for themselves. They've literally said that, Israel did. So when we are aiding and abetting, or us ourselves engaging in this type of behavior, when we're orchestrating coups of democratically elected presidents or leaders, How do you think the citizens of these countries that have been victimized by our government's actions are going to feel about the United States? Because the whole notion of blowback is an important thing to keep in mind. Blowback is very much real. Now, in the case of Israel, they've found a way to somewhat protect themselves from blowback by getting our government to fund their defense capabilities. That's the Iron Dome. So when they know that they can act with impunity, when they don't have to worry about their actions leading to blowback that could get their citizens killed in large numbers, well, then they're going to be emboldened to keep carrying out, the atrocities they've been carrying out. In the case of the United States, we don't have an Iron Dome. And I think that and this is not a commentary about our soldiers. This is a commentary about our military capabilities. I think that we have gotten way too cocky in thinking that we're never going to see any trouble here on domestic soil. Our actions are never going to come back to haunt us. I think we should really start thinking about very real consequences that arise from the foreign policy that our government engages in. With that in mind, I wanted to read the excerpt from Masoud Pezeshkian's open letter to Americans today. Okay, so he's the president of Iran, and he says basically what you just heard from Dave Smith. Relations between Iran and the United States were not originally hostile, and early interactions between the Iranian and American people were not marred with hostility or coup d'etat, an illegal American 1953 tension. The turning point, however, was the intervention aimed at preventing the nationalization of Iran's own resources. That's why we did the coup in 1953. That coup disrupted Iran's democratic process, reinstated dictatorship, and sowed deep distrust among Iranians toward US policies. This distrust deepened further with America's support for the Shah's regime. Its backing of Saddam Hussein. We did back Saddam Hussein during the Iraq-Iran war in the 1980s. During the imposed war of 1980s, the imposition of the longest and most comprehensive sanctions in modern history, and ultimately unprovoked military aggression twice in the midst of negotiations against Iran. So you guys can understand actions have consequences. You can't punch someone in the face and expect them to love you. And we've been punching a lot of different countries in the face. That doesn't mean the American people are bad. Obviously, I freaking love this country and I love the people within this country. But it does mean that our government, historically speaking and in modern times, has carried out foreign policy that I believe actually puts Americans at risk. Certainly our soldiers at risk, which they seem to have no problem doing willy-nilly. But yeah, this foreign policy causes a lot of hostility. All right, so let's talk about some other things that were discussed during this podcast episode, because as debates continue as debates continue taking place about rising anti-Semitism in the United States, and they do play out on the national stage, Dave Smith actually provided some clarity as to why the phenomenon is happening in the first place. Let's take a look.
We're 2% of the population in America. We are, by all objective standards, thriving. We're doing great. Jews are not an oppressed minority in America. We're doing better than the average American is doing, substantially. There's never once been an obstacle put in my way because I was Jewish. I never couldn't go to this school or couldn't get this job or couldn't do anything like that. And I've had a really great life here. In fact, probably the most anti-Semitism I've ever dealt with is from the pro-Israel people who call me like a capo every day because I don't support another reckless war. So my perspective is okay, so you're telling me the whole world treated us like crap. We've come here to America where we've been just very successful and treated very well. My default position is to love the country for that. Like, oh, well, then we should be really grateful
yeah.
to this country. That should be the attitude. Not going around lecturing people about whether they've been to the museum about our suffering from decades ago. If any self-respecting conservative or self-respecting right-winger saw any other minority group complaining about their mistreatment in another continent, in another country, in another century, you'd go, hey, shut up, get over it. We have to stop fighting wars on behalf of Israel, and we have to have some type of separation. I mean, I'm not saying that, like, I'm not saying we should be enemies with Israel or that we should go to war with Israel or anything like that. But the relationship, the special relationship between the U.S. and Israel is so freaking weird. And now in this new media environment, it's been exposed. I don't think you can put that toothpaste back in the tube.
Can't.
Okay, so I come at this from a slightly different perspective. I did agree with part of what Dave Smith said there, particularly the very last part, although I think if there's ever a case to go to war against any country, it would be Israel, but that's never going to happen. Now, what he said earlier in that statement, I don't necessarily agree with. I have no problem. In fact, I like the fact that we learn about the Holocaust in school. I do have a problem with the fact that there have been other terrible genocides and atrocities committed in world history that we don't learn about at all. And I want to know why that is. I mean, I didn't question it when I was growing up, but we never learned about the Armenian genocide in school, ever, ever, ever. That was not in any of my history books in high school. So that's a little weird. Like, how do the decision makers, when it comes to public education, decide what the curriculum for social studies or history looks like? So it's an important question to ask yourself. And then you look back at who published our textbooks for our public schools. And it happened to be Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Robert Maxwell. So I want kids to learn more about history because history is what prevents you from repeating the same mistakes, which I think we've been repeating lately. And also, if you watch my commentary soon after October 7th, right? Like, I was actually far more sympathetic to Israel than I am today. There's no question about it. And as the genocide in Gaza just went on, and there was just this shamelessness demonstrated by the Israeli government, obviously you become more and more angry about the injustices that you're seeing with your own two eyes. And so since then, after seeing all those innocent people slaughtered at the hands of the IDF, some people get upset and they're able to differentiate between a government, a foreign country, and the entire population of Jewish people. I don't take the actions of what the Israeli government is doing and put that on the Jewish population. That would be stupid. I wouldn't want my government, my current government, to represent my own views or the views of the American people when it comes to things like foreign policy. So I would never in a million years say like, oh, I don't even like saying this, but it's the Jewish people. No, it's not. However, there's a political ideology that's incredibly problematic that leads to what we are seeing with Israel today. And yeah, that's Zionism. That's this thought that you are entitled to not just having a Jewish state, but expanding your borders and taking control of the Middle East. So we've seen land annexation, failed states as a result of, toppling regimes, arming terrorist groups in countries like Syria, which is why, Syria has the leader it has today. All of that stuff leads to a lot of hostility and rage, right? And so when Netanyahu says that this is done in the name of the Jewish state or Jewish people, well, then others are not going to differentiate between a foreign country's government and the entire Jewish population. And so it would be great if the Israeli government stopped saying that they're doing this on behalf of the Jews, and that more importantly, anyone who condemns genocide and land theft is an anti-Semite. That being said, I definitely agree with what the two of them had to say in this next clip. Let's take a look at that.
There is a rise of Jew hatred. And if you really do care about that, the only way to combat that is that we got to end this. You know, like the same way we needed a separation of church and state so we don't fight religious wars anymore, we need a separation of the Israel lobby and the United States of America.
I think it's tough. You know, we're very enmeshed, like more than people understand. Representatives, official and non-official, of the Israeli government throughout the U.S. government at every single level, state and federal. Okay, there's that. In our institutions, that would include the Pentagon and CIA, are biggest and most important. And then there's the question of, like, what does that mean for Israel? Like, do they just allow the United States to be like, right, you know, you're just like whatever, France now or Spain? We're going to treat you like, you know, an ally, but not a sibling. I think that we get punished for that. People are afraid of Israel. That's the difference between Israel and Spain. Everyone loves Spain. It's great. The Spanish, we can have bases there. You can put missiles there. It's all great. But no one thinks if you pull back aid from Spain, they're going to hurt you. But everyone is afraid of being physically hurt by Israel.
Yeah, because IDF soldiers will slip into your DMs, literally send you photos of weapons that you as an American bankrolled and threaten you with them. That's why. That's why you have public figures who are critical of Israel literally saying out loud, I am not suicidal. I don't have any health problems. I'm very careful when I drive my vehicle. Like, people are genuinely worried that they will be harmed. And that is, by the way, don't forget the fact that early on in the Gaza genocide, you literally had American politicians like Nikki freaking Haley going to Israel to sign the bombs that they're going to drop on children's heads. Remember when the IDF was writing Cenk's name on a missile? Remember that? Those threats. Yeah, those are the threats that make people fearful for their lives if they are openly and vocally critical of the very real war crimes that the Israeli government and military has carried out. And that's the kind of stuff, that's the kind of behavior that leads to hatred. And I wish it would stop, because I don't want Jewish people to be harmed. I don't want them to be targeted. I don't want them to feel uncomfortable. And I don't like hatred of any kind, whether it's racism, bigotry, xenophobia, sexism, misandry, all of that stuff. I hate it. I loathe it. I always have and I always will. But actions always have consequences. I talked about how US foreign policy leads to hostility toward the United States. It doesn't mean that the American people are bad people, but the actions of our government leads to other countries loathing us. It's not fair to us, but we have to hold governments accountable. And what Netanyahu, what the Israeli government has done, by the way, not just under Netanyahu, this historically has been a problem, and we're at a point where just the war crimes have reached a level that I never thought we would see in our lifetimes. I thought that Americans had evolved past it, but I was definitely wrong and naive about it. So I appreciate them having that conversation. And by the way, I also want to give Dave Smith a lot of credit for calling out the individuals who are actually anti-Semitic. They're the ones who go after Dave because he's not allowed to be a Jewish individual who has his own views on Israel's behavior. If he speaks out against Israel, as other Jewish people have, he gets smeared as someone who's like, oh, he's a self-hating Jew. Oh, so you're not allowed to identify as a Jewish person who loves your identity but is critical of a foreign country's behavior and actions? Oh, you have to have certain beliefs in order to be qualified as Jewish? No, that sounds anti-Semitic to me. It's not difficult. Judge people based on their character. Judge individuals based on their behavior. But don't lump an entire group of people together. Don't allow absolute scumbags like Benjamin Netanyahu to represent an entire population of people across the globe. That's my view of it. All right, we gotta take a break. When we come back for the second hour, we'll do a lighter story. We'll have some fun. I'm gonna read your comments, and we'll wrap up the main show and head over to our members only bonus episode. Remember, tyt.com/join to become a member. We'll be right back. Listen, with all of the incredibly heavy news that we've been dealing with, it's important for you to diversify your content. Okay, so lucky for you, Brett Ehrlich is hosting Happy Half Hour tonight after the bonus episode. He does so over at Twitch. I don't see. Oh, here we go. So just go to twitch.tv/TYT immediately after our bonus episode tonight. That's at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Pacific. And by the way, you can actually support TYT by linking your Amazon Prime account and then subscribing for free onto the TYT Twitch channel. But I love Happy Half Hour. It's honestly like a very fun show. Brett is hilarious. And I don't know how he finds the content he finds for his show, but he finds it and it's really fun. So definitely check that out. That's twitch.tv/TYT. All right. And I've got some comments that I want to read. There's a lot of comments I want to read. So for our members, I'm going to spend some time reading your comments during the bonus episode today. We're going to get to our final story for the main show in just a bit, but I wanted to take some time to read some comments from our Twitch community, from our members. Thank you to everyone for sharing your thoughts with me. Let's start with Catch a Butterfly at our Twitch community, who, by the way, you just had your 45-day stream streak reached. That sounds freaking awesome. We're going streaking. By the way, does anyone know that reference? I mean, I'm so old at this point. Like, do you know that that's from a Judd Apatow movie? I have no idea. Anyway, Octo Squiddy says, Alex, my dude, you're 8 months behind on Kenkelgate when it comes to Trump. You're supposed to be on the cutting edge of conspiracies. You've lost your touch, old man. He certainly has. He certainly has. Honestly, one of my favorite Kyle Kulinski videos is where he's talking about the bruising that you see on like Trump's hands. And his whole theory is that he's been abusing stimulants so much. And when you abuse stimulants, basically the blood kind of rushes to your organs and like you have less blood circulation in your arms and legs, and that could lead to bruising. That's his theory. I'm not a doctor and I'm not saying that's true, but I was amused by that theory. Let's go to Tech Nauseated, who says they are a defense alliance, NATO is. He needs to learn reading comprehension, absolutely. But the thing about Trump is he feels entitled to anything he desires at any given moment. So he doesn't really care what NATO is supposed to be about. He just, he totally defeated Iran, but he wants our NATO allies involved. Okay. Great New Dealer Dragon says, if you punch someone in the face and then they put you in a chokehold, you can't then ask, why are you grabbing me? I know that reference. Avenger Dragon says, TYT taught me about the Armenian genocide. Yes, and by the way, major credit to Cenk, because his willingness to debate with me, listen to me, engage with me on that very topic led to his change of heart on that matter. And rather than giving him crap for holding the views he did before, I give him praise for changing his mind when presented with new information. Let's go to, I want to read a few more comments and then we'll move on. Dylan Madden says, Kamala Harris is coming to my hometown of Little Rock this month. Do you all have any ideas of what question to ask her if I get the chance? I would definitely ask her about foreign policy. because I do think that that's one of the main reasons why her campaign started going south. She didn't want to differentiate herself from Joe Biden. And to me, that was a massive, massive mistake. Joe Biden's foreign policy was a disaster, and it really made me sour on Democrats. And that doesn't mean that I was suddenly like, ooh, rah, rah, Republicans, because Republicans historically have been far more interventionist in their foreign policy. But like, I'm not gonna vote for anyone who provides excuses or cover for genocide. I'm just not gonna do it, period. Anyway, all right, we've got one more story to do. This one's lighter, although what would Trump be if it weren't gaudy? Like at least that, right? And so when it comes to the presidential library, oh, he's going gaudy. He's going real gaudy. So let's get into it.
Your son Eric posted a photo of what will be the Trump Presidential Library. Yeah. It's a huge skyscraper. Is that all a library? What else is going in there?
Well, it's going to be most likely a hotel.
I'm tired. I'm just so tired. Okay, so on Monday, President Donald Trump's son, Eric, decided to put out the first renderings of the Trump Presidential Library and Museum. There's just like one small issue here, which is that it doesn't really look like a presidential library, and it certainly doesn't look like a museum. In fact, it looks like just another hotel. And as you just heard from that video, Trump confirms, yeah, it's like a hotel. To be fair, I mean, what would he put in his library? So as you saw, the size of the building is pretty substantial, pretty large skyscraper to say the least, but wait until you see inside what the presidential library is supposed to look like. All right, so we're taking a look at this. All right, of course, you gotta have the golden Donald Trump name. All right, lots of gold. Trump definitely loves gold. It's very gilded. That actually looks like the Reagan Library inside. All right, you got some fighter jets. Nice. I love, by the way, let me just say the Air Force One exhibit where you can go inside Air Force One. I don't know if you can do that at every presidential library. You certainly can do that at the Reagan Library. And that was really cool. That I'm not saying that I was a fan of Reagan's administration, but being able to walk inside and tour Air Force One and kind of see what it's like is really cool. So I don't have a problem with them having that there. But the whole notion of this being a hotel is kind of strange. Now, Eric Trump released the full 2-minute video rendering on Monday, and he also included the following on X. He says, the Donald J. Trump Presidential Library is officially here. It's not officially here, they're renderings, but okay. Over the past 6 months, I have poured my heart and soul into this project with my incredible team at Trump. This landmark on the water in Miami, oh God, will stand as a lasting testament to an amazing man, an amazing developer, blah, blah, blah. These images have never been seen by the public until today. Enjoy. Oh yeah, we're really enjoying them. So according to CNN, the renderings were actually designed by a Miami-based architect or an architecture firm, Bermelo Ajamil. And they include reconstructions of Trump's gilded Oval Office and the Rose Garden. Scenes in the mock-ups also resemble the Presidential Walk of Fame installed on the West Colonnade and plans for an immense ballroom. God, Trump loves his ballrooms, man. He loves his ballrooms, okay? Immense ballroom Trump is hoping to build where the East Wing once stood. Okay. Why didn't you just go be like an interior designer, bro? Like, why did you have to try to be president? Like, why, all right. Reference to key moments in Trump's political ascendance also appear in the video. Visitors are pictured riding a golden escalator much like the one Trump glided down, I should say, glided down when he announced his first presidential campaign. And inside a massive auditorium, a towering golden statue of the president with his fist raised is seen on stage, mimicking his reaction following the July 2024 attempt on his life in Butler, Pennsylvania. By the way, have we gotten any clarity on that whole thing, the Butler, Pennsylvania assassination attempt? Any new findings from any investigation by the FBI? Just curious about that. But anyway, whatever. Look, this is fine. There, I'm gonna leave it there. This is fine. Okay, you wanna bastardize the whole notion of a presidential library and build like a hotel skyscraper instead? Fine. But is he gonna profit from it? That's the real question. And honestly, I don't really know. Now, look, there are some rules when it comes to the presidential library. They're typically privately funded, so it's not paid by the taxpayers, which is a good sign. And it's not really a presidential library. And Trump says it's only going to be a library in name only, which is strange. So this is Trump talking about, this is Trump talking about how he doesn't really do libraries. Okay, so let's take a look at this next video.
It's a library, it's a museum or library, it's a presidential, but I wouldn't start it till I'm out of office. I don't believe in building libraries or museums. It's really like the Barack Hussein Obama one in Chicago. In not a good location, and it's a very unattractive building that's seriously late and seriously over budget. I think you're gonna see a great one here, and it'll go up on time, on budget, best location in Miami. They say it's the best block in Miami, and the state worked with us.
Will people live in the floors?
No, it's going to be most likely a hotel. This concept could be office, but it's most likely going to be a hotel with a beautiful building underneath and a 747 Air Force One in the lobby, which is going to be a trick.
Is he looking to profit off the presidential library? It looks like that's what's going to happen here. It looks like it's just another Trump hotel. And there might be some artifacts from his presidency involved in some of the floors or something. Okay. According to NPR, it's unclear how long the construction will take or how much this will actually cost. And the architect firm has declined to answer any questions about it. However, a nonprofit called the Donald J. Trump Presidential Library Fund was set up in December of 2024 after ABC News agreed to donate $15 million toward a future presidential library as part of its defamation lawsuit settlement with then candidate Trump. Over the next year, that fund got an influx of cash from various legal settlements with Meta, X, and Paramount. By the way, these private funds for the president also could be used for corrupt purposes, right? Buying off politicians, buying off the president. The fund was dissolved by the state in September of 2025, just days before the trustees' vote, after it failed to file a mandatory annual report. It is not clear how much money was in the fund, but a trio of federal Democratic lawmakers pursuing the issue says it could have held up to $63 million in settlement money. That's crazy. So I don't know what happened to that money. I don't know what the end result of this Trump library is really going to be. All I know is this guy is always looking for some way of profiting off of anything and everything. This is how billionaires operate, right? I mean, they're just thinking about exploiting any and every opportunity to make money. My brain doesn't work that way, which is why I'll never be a billionaire. I don't even care about being a billionaire. As long as I'm able to pay my bills, that's all I need. But I would be so excited if I were lucky enough, fortunate enough to gain enough trust from the American people to become president of the United States. And I would be elated that I get a library that's privately funded. But with Trump, it's how could I use this for my own purposes? How can we use this to build another Trump hotel? So we'll see what the end result is. And honestly, ultimately, I don't care. I think at the end of the day, once he's gone, it'll be so much of a relief that his library isn't going to matter to me much. But I'm curious what you all think. So comment, write in. Very curious what you think in the comment section below. All right, before we go to our bonus episode, I do have a few comments I want to read from our members. So if you are a member, this is your last opportunity to write in. We've got Mr. Anderson who says, I love being wrong because that means in that instance, I learned something new that day. And that was a comment from Neil deGrasse Tyson, a quote from him. That's totally true. There's nothing wrong with realizing you were wrong about something and you have now changed your mind because you've been presented with new evidence. In fact, I think that is a sign of not only character, but also intelligence. Bach says, I need to go find another pillow to yell into. I know. Partisan hypocrites everywhere says, when empty suits like Keir Starmer are dunking on you, you have serious problems. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Keir Starmer either. Yeah, especially since the Labor Party started behaving very similar to the corporate Democrats here in the United States when it came to fighting pretty viciously against anyone to the left of them. Let's go to Original Props, who says, a good politician shouldn't require hostility amongst the people as the foundation for building a better government. Yep, totally agree. Members only is next, tyt.com/join. See you there.